Фатима, Фатима, всегда спешит на помощь. Фатима, 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 ответит на вопросы. Фатима, 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 ах, какое имя. Фатима, Фатима, о, Фатима.
К сожалению, автомобильные аварии, травмы на работе и другие неприятности могут настигнуть каждого. Звоните Фатиме. Хиропрактическая клиника поможет справиться с последствиями аварии, производственных травм и других несчастных случаев. Наши опытные специалисты окажут профессиональную медицинскую и юридическую помощь и помогут получить максимальную компенсацию. 503-261-71-21. 503-261-71-21.
Фатима.
Новости региона, выборы, кандидаты, стремления. Новая программа Slavic Vote Live. Каждую неделю в прямом эфире. Slavic Vote Live дает голос славянской общине по всему северо-западу. Мы говорим и информируем о важном в Вашингтоне, Орегоне, Калифорнии. По четвергам в 17:00. Присоединяйтесь к прямому эфиру на 10:40 АМ. Ищите Slavic Vote в соцсетях. Мы намерены продолжать продвигать свое видение и оказывать любую необходимую поддержку сообществу, чтобы изменить ситуацию к лучшему. Slavic Vote Live.
Внимание!
Редакция медиахолдинга Slavic Family не несет ответственность за содержание рекламных сообщений и авторских программ.
Добрый день. Вы слушаете передачу Slavic Vote Live. С вами Дима Сащенко и Ярослав, как обычно. Мы сегодня, как обычно, приходим на эти волны, чтобы поговорить по поводу, что происходит в Орегоне, в Вашингтоне, по поводу разных выборов, какие-то, может быть, интересные новости, какие-то, может быть, интересные законы, которые проходят, и также, конечно, выборы, которые также будут проходить в этом году и в следующем году, которые все, я думаю, или большинство ожидают 2024 год, где будут президентские выборы. Ну, как раз, пока еще у нас еще нету этих выборов, у нас сейчас другие выборы. У нас сейчас проходят выборы в Вашингтоне, недавно только прошли выборы в Орегоне, которые мы уже много об этом говорили. Есть хорошие результаты, есть не очень. Я думаю, самое, что я думаю, самое, что получилось в этих выборах, это, как говорится, не очень много людей вышло. Ярослав, ты помнишь примерно, какой процент вышло в этот раз?
Ну, в Орегоне это было 21%.
Да.
Я вам говорю, если вы с Вашингтона, у нас сейчас будут выборы, это будет в августе 1 числа.
Да.
14 июля они должны уже высылать бланки, так что я думаю, вам придут, может, там 15-16. То давайте победим Орегон. У нас будет такая гонка, чтобы было больше, чем 21%.
Да. Получается 21. Потом у нас будет также выборы в конце года, которые будут также вашингтонские, и уже будем готовиться на следующий год. Мы извиняемся, конечно, у нас немножко по звуку немножко была проблема в начале. Я просто представлял нашего ко-хоста Ярослава. Вы слушаете передачу Slavic Vote Live. С вами Дима Сащенко и Ярослав Борисов. У нас сегодня будет очень интересный гость. Кто, может быть, немножко смотрит, что происходит в Орегоне. Сейчас в Орегоне проходило в этом году, как обычно, законы проходят каждые 2 года. И в этом году в Орегоне пытались провести не очень хорошие законы. И сенаторы в Орегоне просто решили не прийти на работу, чтобы не голосовать за это. И это, короче, была очень большая проблема. И они практически потеряли свою работу, если они это сделают. И вот они сегодня уже решили на какой-то, как сказать, компромисс. Да. И вот сенатор Дэниел Баннам, он немножко поговорит, что произошло, и также что будет дальше. И, конечно, он немножко себя представит и поговорит о его истории и почему он занимается этим делом. Как обычно, я хочу напомнить, что если вы живете в Орегоне, в Вашингтоне, и вам нужна помощь по поводу выборов, вы можете найти это все на нашей страничке slavicvote.org. И также, если вы недавно приехали с Украины или вы знаете, кто недавно приехал с Украины, как беженцы по паролю, и вам нужна помощь. У нас есть некоторые ресурсы. Сейчас здесь, в Кларк-Каунти, выпустили некоторую сумму денег, которые помогают этим беженцам. И у нас есть контакты с некоторыми организациями, и также мы работаем, чтобы помогать в этом деле. Если вы нас слушаете и вам интересна эта информация, вы можете позвонить по телефону, который я сейчас скажу, можете подготовиться. Опять, если вам нужна помощь по украинским... Если вы приехали с Украины, вам нужна помощь в общем по поводу помощи жилья и так дальше. И даже, может быть, более интересно, какие-то вопросы у вас очень важные, вам нужна организация помочь. Вы можете обратиться, опять, телефончик, который я сейчас дам, запишите, 971-244-2228. И еще раз, 971-2228. Опять, если вы недавно приехали с Украины, вы беженцы, или вы знаете кого-то, передайте эту информацию, и мы сконтактируемся с ними. Я сейчас буду переходить на английский язык с нашим гостем, сенатор Дэниел Банном, и он немножко о себе поговорит. Надеюсь, вы остаетесь с нами, надеюсь, вы будете с нами. Если вы хотите посмотреть эту передачу в будущем, или еще раз посмотреть, или посмотреть наши все бывшие передачи, вы также можете найти нас на YouTube, на Facebook, на Instagram и также на нашем веб-сайте все наши бывшие передачи. Спасибо большое. Вы слушали передачу Slavic Vote Live. Senator Daniel, thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. I know we've been trying to have you come and share here at the studio for a little while. You've been really, really busy, and I really appreciate you coming on and making this time to come and speak to our community and help understand what's been going on the last couple of years, the year and everything else. Thank you. How are you?
Of course. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank
it's
you.
a pleasure to be here. I'm doing okay. It's a little interesting time today, being the first day after 40 plus days of walking out of the session and denying quorum, taking a stand on a moral stance on what parental rights should be, a lawful stance on honoring the oath of office in terms of both the law that we swear to uphold and the Constitution, both of Oregon and the United States. So we had some challenges that pushed us to the point that we thought the only thing that made sense to do was to walk out and deny quorum, and that was our constitutional protest, which we have the right to do, which I would say, have the obligation to do in the face of an unlawful, unconstitutional, uncompromising session that we were up against. So today is an interesting day in that 5 of our members returned to the floor and provided quorum enough to pass 2 bills that I think we had significant challenges with.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And the Slavic community has been very recently got involved, and it's very confusing what's going on. Kind of understand what's been, what is, how the bill even passes through the chambers and all that good stuff. So today, maybe you can share a little bit about that and the importance of it. And before we get in there, of course, I would like to also have you introduce yourself a little bit more and share a little bit about your story and what made you get involved to begin with. I think that'll help people understand what your background a little bit.
Absolutely.
And you've been around for a little while, and you started as a representative, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then now senator. And this is your second year, is that correct?
First year as a
First
senator.
year, yeah. And I believe this walkout that you guys did, you put your job on the line essentially because you were, and maybe it still is in many
on the
ways.
line. Yeah.
So that's we appreciate your sacrifice, and we'll definitely want to get that story out. Before we do get into that story, I usually have Yaroslav share a little bit for those listeners who may be tuning in for the first time. Who is Slavic Vote? What exactly we do, and just really briefly, if you can share. I mean, again, for those who are tuning in for the first time.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan, but we do represent a community that's really conservative. We're about 4 years old. So we're a 4-year-old organization, kind of young, I think, in politics, but for the Slavic community, for some of us that have been here for 30 years, we kind of just realized that the Slavic community wasn't really voting. If you think the 21% that Oregon had in their last election is dismal, in the Slavic community, it was way lower. Mm-hmm. I think we had like a 16 or 17% registration rate just to get ballots. Right. And then the voting was probably even lower than that. So the first couple of years, we just literally tackled that. We went to every church organization that would let us in, and we did drives. We got a lot of people registered. Then the second issue that we kind of ran into is people are getting these ballots, but you've probably tried reading the pamphlet. Unless you're a lawyer, good luck. So we kind of started working with people, digesting, providing voter guides, working with different organizations, so we didn't have to kind of reinvent the wheel. We did that for probably about a good, second year, third year. And then we had people that actually wanted to go for smaller positions. We're not running for state like higher positions, but we're like school boards. A lot of them are nonpartisan, just getting to know the process. We're not even really going for a win at this point, although Seattle had some really interesting candidates that ran.
Right.
But it's just, getting the Slavic community to activate, making people realize that the people that are working in that big white building are just people. I mean, a lot of them are educated, smart business owners. They have the time to do this, but also a lot of people, as we're finding out doing these interviews, is that these people are there not for any kind of benefit as far as financial or career-wise. It's literally people that are worried about what's happening in their neighborhood, in their county, their city, and the state in general, like in your case. So that's where we're kind of at. We're trying to get the community really activated. That's why your story, because you're rather young. I'm not going to ask your age in the public, but
46.
You're pretty young, and you're in politics, and we're seeing a lot of young people get really interested in politics. Actually, this whole organization started from people that are like 30s average, that were like, whoa, what's going on? And the Russian community only woke up when all the medical stuff started coming out. So that's what woke up the whole community and whatnot. So we're really interested in, how you even got involved in politics. Is this something that started from like family? Where did you grow up? How many kids in the family and all that stuff?
So my parents moved to Tigard when I was about a year old. And so I grew up from the Bay Area.
Okay.
So my dad worked for HUD, for Housing and Urban Development. So he was a government employee, worked downtown, and moved to Portland essentially when I was a year old. And so grew up in Tigard, went to Tigard High School, graduated in 95. I'm 46. I was 40 years old when I got into politics, and I was looking around the room really young. Since then, there's been a little bit of a youth movement. There's a lot more young people that have come to the legislature. But, grew up involved in student government in school, grew up playing sports, just kind of very active in the community and in my church. And so went to college, met my wife, and we started to raise a family. And I went to work for Evergreen Airlines down in McMinnville. So I was, a young corporate executive, traveling the world and doing sales and marketing and contract negotiations. And so really enjoyed that, but got to the point where I was traveling so much, I wasn't able to coach the soccer team or go to all the basketball games. And so my wife and I found a small business out in her hometown of the Dalles. And so we moved out to the Dalles 16 years ago, bought a small business, and we're able to be flexible enough to really raise our family and engage with our kids. And I met a friend of hers from high school, a man, Tanner Elliott, and he was a city councilor at the time. And I said to him, "What's your political ambition? What do you want to do with this? Are you just interested in local politics, or do you have ambition?" He said, I think I'd like to be a state representative someday. And I knew enough about it to where I said, well, if you ever do that, call me and I'll run your campaign and I'll be your chief of staff. And he said, I don't know if they have those. I said, no, they do. They do.
When was this again?
This was in 2007. I met Tanner. And so at the time, kind of didn't think much of it. And a few years later, we revisited, and he said, if ever John Huffman, who was our state rep at the time, goes away, maybe I'd consider that. And so 2017, I walked in to my house. There's a newspaper. I started reading this article about how John Huffman had resigned because the Trump administration had appointed him to be the USDA Rural Development Director of the state of Oregon. So a little bit of bump in pay, to your point about how much we make. I think he went from like 26,000 to about 130. So not a bad gig for him. But so he moved on. I called Tanner immediately and I said, hey, this is our chance. Like you can do this. And he had 2 little girls at the time, and he said, my kids are just the wrong age. Like, it's not my time. Maybe you should do it. And so my wife was sitting in the room, and I looked at her. I said, hey, babe, like, Tanner says I should do this. What do you think? And she said, you should totally do it. Like, you're into this stuff. Like,
Wow.
You were involved at some level already?
So I was on the city budget committee because I had known Tanner, and he said, man, we could use somebody that understands business. You can come sit on the budget committee. And so I did that. And then, because it's got enough of experience of, wow, you know, I see how government works. They waste a lot of money. They spend a lot more money than the private sector does to do the same thing. And I wonder what the state's like. And so when the opportunity popped up, I threw my name in the hat. You know, it was an appointment process, so it had to be a Republican. So I was one of 5 people that went through a nominee process to replace John. And ultimately, I was appointed. And then I ran in 2018, then 2020. I won both those elections. Then redistricting changed things. And ultimately, I was kind of left without a home. Every district I was drawn into had a sitting member. And so Chuck Thompson, who was the state senator at the time, said, hey, I think I'm going to not run again. Maybe you should run for the Senate. And so I did. But when I got down there, Dimitri and I met because I got involved in leadership, and we started talking about the Slavic community, the Russian Orthodox community down in Woodburn, and how many of these folks like share our ideals as Republicans that aren't engaged in the political process here at Oregon. And so we had great interest to see this community step up and register to vote first and foremost, but then engage. And we helped Anna Kostachev run for office. That was a tough district at the time, you know, a significant Democratic advantage, but she ran an honorable race. And it was interesting to watch doors open within the community to support a female candidate, to stand up and really rally around her and try and give her a voice. But I mean, it's something I like when Dimitri said, hey, come talk to this group on the radio. I said, absolutely. Like we desperately need conservative people to stand up and vote. And so to come full circle to your comment about ballot measures, right? You said, gosh, these things are hard to understand. Segue into where we are today and why we walked. It started with, there's a Senate rule, 13.2 subparagraph 5, that says you have to conform to the law in ORS. And there's a statute that says that every bill summary should be readable. For transparency reasons, you should have it readable so that people at home understand what you're doing, and readable at an 8th grade level. And so there's a Flesch-Kincaid readability scale. You can look it up on the internet and say Flesch-Kincaid readability scale. You can copy and paste paragraphs in there, and it'll give you a score. And the lower the score, the more complex it is. So we took some of these bills,
ran it through it. And for example, House Bill 2002, I think scored like a 2.
Wow.
Which
that's
means,
out of, what is it, out of 10?
Well, 60 is 8th grade. And so the higher the score, the lower the education you have to have. So to score a 2 meant you had to have postdoctorate education to understand what the summary.
And can you repeat that website again? That sounds like a cool website.
Yeah.
Flesch-Kincaid. If you just look up Flesch-Kincaid readability, FLESCH, and then KINCAID, Flesch-Kincaid.
So in Oregon, sorry, I'm from Vancouver.
Yeah.
I'm from Washington. So in Oregon already had this readability
in statute.
Okay, got
So
it.
it was in 3 places that we pointed to. It's in our Senate rules, it's in statute, and then it was also in the Constitution. The Constitution says, to the extent practicable, all measures shall be readable and avoid at all costs technical jargon. So the Constitution says, be transparent with the people. Don't do anything to where they can't understand what you're doing. The people should be able to engage in the process, and to do so, don't use your legalese, don't use fancy terms.
So since I'm from Washington, I'm not really familiar as far as with that measure. How complex was this measure, and what was it for example? Just give us an example of the layout of it. And
so HB 2002 is what you're referring to, right?
2002.
Which created a lot of the chaos, or started at least, right?
Yeah, what was it about?
Yeah. So House Bill 2002 for me really was the major issue of this session that Democrats had not campaigned on, but yet was part of a massive political move for them, kind of a national progressive liberal move, not being responsive to Oregonians, but it was a bill that expanded abortion rights. We already have the most expansive abortion laws in the entire world. You can have an abortion for any reason up until the point of birth. So we don't need expansion of those laws. It affirmed that you had the right to transgender care, whether that be hormone therapy or surgery, and that you could do both of those things without parental consent on the abortion side at any age, and on the transgender side at 15. You can make that decision for yourself without your parents.
Wow.
So I want to, for our listeners who might not fully follow what's going on here.
Yeah.
So this bill that you're referring to, everything you said sounds terrible, but for a lot of the Slavic community, they're like, well, for us, we're not involved in that. It's not going to affect us.
Right.
But one thing that most people don't understand, this is all taxpayer funded. Is that correct?
So
Or in sure.
not in
explain
every
that a little
aspect,
bit,
but to the challenge of forcing insurance providers to pay for it. So if it's not taxpayer, if it's an insurance pool, if you have insurance, you're paying into it,
Right.
right? Because every expense that an insurance company has, they spread across every member within their portfolio. And so it may not be through taxation, but it's forcing payment if you're insured that you're part of that. And the state of Oregon is absolutely trying to move to a universal single-payer healthcare system.
So essentially, all the stuff that wouldn't apply to them, we're actually funding a lot of this stuff. And I think that another aspect of HB 2002, there is also there's supposed to be some kind of abortion pills provided at all colleges at taxpayer funded as well.
So the good news, if there is any, about what we amended in 2002, because some of our Republican colleagues went back today.
HB 2002, the bill, right?
House Bill 2002 passed today. So we had been denying quorum over this bill. They amended the bill significantly to remove the college campus portion, to remove the taxpayer-funded pills. There was a lot of that was removed. Removed investment in Eastern Oregon to try and invite people over from Idaho, and added what I'll call the Cedric Hayden Amendment, which was a significant amendment with respect to parental consent, codifying in statute that you have to have parental consent.
And
up
to
the only
a certain age?
Up to 15.
15.
Up to 15.
Before that, it was no parental consent.
We thought we had it at 18 last night. We thought we got it to 18, and the compromise today was 15, which is where it has been here in the state of Oregon. So parental consent can only be bypassed now under this new law that just passed today if there is evidence of rape or incest where there has been a crime committed on that child. But it also then simultaneously brings in those assault statutes and say, you as a provider are a mandatory reporter and you have to report that. You don't get to say, we suspect that this is happening and so we're going to provide this care to perform an abortion. And it does that consent language carries over to the transgender affirming care portion of the bill too. So to the extent that there could be any criminal activity, negligence, whatnot, that a parent could commit upon a child, harm that could lead them to make a decision that they could bypass if there was evidence of a crime. But again, they would then have to bring in law enforcement and do something about it.
Got it. Yeah. So just today, basically, is when you guys finally came back into session, and
well, not all of us,
right? Let's go ahead and expand on that a little bit because not everybody did exactly.
So there's 30 state senators. 13 of us were part of a walkout. 11 of us had been gone for more than 10 days. You referenced ballot measure 113.
Can you expand on that a little more? Exactly what that was and what it would do if you guys didn't come back in time?
So ballot measure 113 is a little bit vague and ambiguous, but what the proponents believe that they intended it to do was to force anybody that leaves for more than 10 days with unexcused absences to not be able to run in the next election. The plain language of the bill that was put on the ballot measure says that I can't run in the election following the end of my term. Well, the election that would reelect me to the office happens before the end of my term. So the way I read the language is I can run again in 2026, elected through my election in 2026 to resume my office that I will then have expire in January of 27. So I should be able to, based on the plain language of the bill, run again. I just can't run then in 2030. So there are some arguments to be made over the constitutionality of that. You know, the First Amendment has been upheld in challenges over campaign finance reform, that you have the right to give me money to elect me. The same First Amendment says that you can't limit the amount of terms I serve, because if you, the voters, want me to serve and I want to serve, that's our First Amendment free speech right to have me represent you. And so there are challenges to this potential law that I think are unconstitutional, that will need to be challenged. And now some of us have standing. We've been harmed by this now, potentially. And so we can finally petition that to the courts and see what the courts have to say about whether or not we can run again. I'm not concerned. I took the stand that I took, knowing full well that that could be a potential consequence. I thought that 2002 was harmful enough to children. I referenced Matthew 18, verse 6, where Jesus was talking to his disciples and he said, better for you to have a millstone around your neck and thrown to the depths of the sea than to harm one of these children that follow me. And so I think, I take really seriously that warning from Jesus, and I think that this bill does do harm.
Right.
And I think it tramples on parents' rights, which, again, I think family is foundational to our society, and we need to strengthen family, not tear it down.
Right.
The state should not be a guardian in any way, shape, or form when parents that love their children more than anything else are there and able to. So I'm happy to make that stand and make those arguments. But at the same time, there was significant amendment, enough that some of my colleagues that also know for a fact that we have a constitutional obligation to pass budgets. So we have a balanced budget requirement that by the end of this session, we have to pass budgets. And so, there definitely is conflict in, I don't like your agenda. I was willing to face the consequence of not being able to come back, but I also am supposed to pass budgets. And so you do have these constitutional requirements that come into conflict with one another, and you have to prioritize, and you have to do the best, and you have to represent your community. And all of our communities are different. And so even though we built a coalition of 13 people, not all of us cared about the same exact thing. Some of us had different reasons for wanting to deny quorum.
Right. So basically, you guys put yourself on the line. If it had to, you would essentially lose your job. Or if with the translation of some people, that's what they would say.
Yeah.
So you guys are. So you mentioned 5 people came back today. Mm-hmm. Expand on that a little more.
Well, I think there's a question with respect to ballot measure 113. I don't think that people at home, when they voted for that, realized that there was one person that made the decision as to whether or not I'm excused.
Right.
And that's the Senate president. And so some people had doctor's appointments. Well, they were unexcused because it happened to coincide with when we were denying quorum. Whereas some people had doctor's appointments when we weren't denying quorum and they were excused. And some people had weddings and birthdays and funerals and these things to go to, excused over here, not excused over here. And so it's been very arbitrary. We would say capricious as well, that it has been used as a political tool as opposed to a tool of accountability that it was meant to be. And so when I swore an oath to uphold the laws of the state of Oregon and the Constitution, and we found this readability law and said, you're not abiding by it. All these bills you're passing are scoring a 14, a 12, a 10, a 2, a 26. None of them are at a 60 where they're supposed to be. You need to redo these. And Democrats, instead of saying, let's either change the law, which they have the votes to do, they could change the scale down to 10 if they wanted to. They have the power and authority and the votes to do that. And they said, we're not going to do that. We're just going to ignore it. Well, that didn't sit well with a bunch of us. And we said, your challenges to some of the parental rights thing are, federally protected rights of family and parents. Your challenge to the Second Amendment are unconstitutional. And so we had reasons to say, not only are you unlawful, you're unconstitutional, and I swore an oath to uphold these things. So until you fix those things, we're not going to come. And so they finally are fixing those things. It's part of the reason why people came back. They removed what they believed were unconstitutional provisions within 2002 and 2005, and they're reading bill summaries into the record that are at a flesh readability scale of 60. So they're accommodating the reason why we said we weren't coming, all the while holding us accountable to say you're unexcused, which you don't get both. You get one or the other, right? Either you tell us that you were right with the law and the Constitution and we were wrong to have walked out, or you accept that you were wrong and you make the corrections that you're doing, but you also then forgive our absences.
Right.
So a couple questions came up. Let me see if I can remember them.
Yeah.
So as far as you mentioned the moral portion of these House bills going through. You also kind of mentioned the budgets that you have to pass. Do you know what the financial burden would have been if this did pass, or did it actually decrease the financial burden once the amendments were put into this House bill, for example?
So the amendments put into it reduced the financial burden significantly. I don't think it had a significant impact on the global budgets. I mean, our budgets are to the tune of $140 billion for this biennium. Wow. So we do budget for every 2 years. So they're 2-year cycles. And it's significant investment that's taking place in the state. We do have things that people care about that we haven't mentioned. Infrastructure like the I-5 bridge.
Oh boy.
The CHIPS Act, that is federal money that if we invest locally, we get a federal match. Other significant investments, I have the Hood River Bridge and the Bridge of the Gods out in Cascade Locks and Hood River that are deteriorating and losing capacity as well. So we need investment there. But the housing and homelessness package, a couple $100 million. And people absolutely cared about that. In the campaigns, we heard Democrats talk about housing and homelessness. So to have them pass a housing and homelessness package, that was a very bipartisan effort. We helped them pass that. We weighed in. They considered the amendments that we had. They considered our feedback. When it came to House Bill 2002 and 2005, they said, we're not going to amend this. We don't care what you have to say. This is what we're doing. And I don't remember a single campaign ad where they said, we want transgender affirming care and unlimited abortion access for anybody at any age. Like, that was never something that they talked to the public about. And it's not responsive to the public. Nobody in the community is sitting at home right now begging for those things to take place. This was somebody's political agenda. I think it was a national Planned Parenthood agenda item to say, we want as many states to do this as possible. Can you do this? And the threat of ballot measure 113, I think, offered them some false sense that there was nothing we could do to stop them. And so they were going to move forward with an extreme agenda. I don't think they expected us to be gone for more than 9 days. They brought it up at the beginning of session, and in our press conference, the first time we had a Republican press conference, one of the reporters said, well, you won't walk for more than 9 days. And I said, yeah, yes, I will. Under the right circuit, like, denying quorum, to be honest, is a terrible way to legislate. To not be in the building, to say you can't do this without us, is terrible. But when the other side says, we don't care what your opinion is, we're not going to listen to you, we're not going to amend, and we're going to move this hyper-partisan piece of legislation that's not responsive to the people of the state of Oregon. No one was begging for this to happen. It really did feel like it was our only option to stop the train from just running over Oregonians.
So, understanding from what you mentioned before, Measure 113 was passed because I'm assuming there was probably prior walkouts.
Absolutely, yeah.
So this one's different just because of the length, the fact that there was a Measure 13 that limited it to 10 days, was it, for the unexpected absence?
Allowed unexcused absences, yeah.
Yeah, that's...
that was birthed from the 2019 walkouts, I'm guessing, and
2020, 2019 and 2020. The last one over cap and trade, which would have been a $6 billion new tax on energy. Would cost every family across the state $1,500 a year to accommodate the tax that would have existed under that new proposal. But this one in particular, what made it interesting, you talk about, there have been walkouts before.
This one's different.
it was different. And it was different in the sense that it really did come down to a moral argument as opposed to a financial argument. We've walked over some significant Second Amendment bills before. We've walked over massive taxation before. But this was really an assault on parental consent and parents' rights, more so than anything else for me. And then what does that leave the child? And we heard that there were reasons for the bill, the suicide ideation of transgender kids, that they have suicide on their head. And so we need to do this to give them the care that they need. Well, the data doesn't support that.
Oh, no.
The data says if you give these kids treatment, it actually exacerbates and makes worse the suicide ideation. So even some of the arguments they were making for why the bill was necessary just didn't make any sense. And so I'm glad that there's been compromise. I do think that it still wasn't where I wanted it to be, but I understand why my Republican colleagues said, you've moved so much on this bill, we want to come make this deal and move on with the budgets. I totally understand that. But again, for me, I still have concern over what harm is. When does that provider get to declare harm? There's a story, anecdotal, I don't have it in any official capacity, but I have heard a story about a young child in California that came home from school, and a little boy that said, "I'm a girl." And the parents said, "No, you're a little boy." And went back to school and said, "My parents told me I'm a little boy, and I know I'm a little girl." And the school nurse said, "Well, that's harm, right? We need to call Child Protective Services, and we need to get you removed from this endangerment that your parents are putting you in, not recognizing your true gender." If that's harm, then I am greatly concerned over a parent's rights to raise their child and to not have the state step in between them. So those questions still are out there for me. I don't believe that this bill answers those questions. I think it only makes those questions more alarming.
Well, what you're talking about, that is some Soviet Union stuff. I mean, I know Yaroslav always shares about some of the experiences that he had. I mean, you can maybe remind folks of.
Oh, it was just, yeah.
I mean, stuff that
we had one of those incidents where, somebody with a red bandana would walk into the classroom and tell you, "Let's go, you're having this procedure done." And the scariest part is the fact that I know for sure my parents are not aware of it.
Right.
And I just learned of it when they told me. That's like by far the most sketchiest, scariest position a human being can be in. But with kids, yeah, that's just a whole different level. I mean,
but you said you moved to the United States at 6?
Yeah. Well, I turned 7 when we were in Italy, but yeah,
Okay.
we left when we were 6. So,
but
this was back then, first grade.
Yeah. And you saw it firsthand. I mean, it is kind of my curiosity. When Dimitri and I first started talking about where the community was in terms of showing up to vote, so many within your community have seen firsthand atrocities like that. And I think, gosh, don't sit by and let it happen to you again. Go register to vote. Elect officials that share your ideology, your concept of what our democratic republic should look like. People do want to point at us as a democracy. We are still a republic. There's 30 senators. We all represent as close to 140,000 people as possible. But again, some laws require 2/3 votes. Some laws require 3/5 votes. And the founding fathers of the state of Oregon built those things in on purpose. And you have to have 2/3 of the members in the body to conduct business. Now, when they passed ballot measure 13, they didn't change the quorum requirement. Do you know why?
Interesting.
Because the labor unions ran polling and people said you shouldn't be able to conduct business with a minimum amount of people. If there's 30, you need at least 20 to conduct business. You shouldn't be able to do it with just 16. You shouldn't be able to do it because that's what they originally proposed. That's the ballot measure they wanted to put forward, was changing the requirement in the Senate to 16 and the requirement in the House to 31. It's currently 20 and 40. They didn't do that, though, at the end of the day. Why wouldn't they do that? If their desire was to say that the majority rules and it just takes 50% plus one to do business, they should have put that on the ballot. But instead they didn't, because people said, no, you need more people than that. And so what the people did say was, we want you to show up and do work. That's not lost on me. I know that people said, don't walk out. I believe that they meant it. And I believe that they want me to suffer a consequence of some sort. I believe that. And yet I also believe that if those people read 2002 and understood it and saw the assault on parental rights and saw what could happen behind the eyes of the parents to the child in the name of compassion or whatever, that they would have said, oh, I'm so glad that you walked. I don't think that bill is responsive to the people of the state of Oregon. And so it really was. Like, I was conflicted with the decision of whether or not to deny quorum, because I heard loud and clear what the results of 113 were. People said, show up and do your job. But I also think they weren't expecting that Democrats were going to uncompromisingly, unlawfully, unconstitutionally put forward a session where they didn't consider the minority party's position, where they didn't consider that parents are foundational to society, that family really is an integral part of society, and it's something we should honor and cherish and not try to degrade. So there are a lot of those considerations. And again, bring it full circle to your community. Your community, I believe, cares about these same things. And that's why I just think, wow, go get your voter registration, stand up some candidates, get involved, whether it's a major statewide election or whether it's a school board or a county commission or a dog catcher. Run for office, get involved, represent your community, be a voice. And I just think it's so important.
Yeah, and a lot of them don't always pay attention to what's going on, like most people. So that these programs, like we do, are a great way to just update them, to educate them, and to inform them what is going on. So they can then, once they hear that, they can go and vote in the way that they feel is best. So this election that's coming up, next year, election that was just happening, unfortunately, we didn't see a turnout as much as we should have. What do you, when you're talking to people, what are most people's reasons for not turning out and voting at 100% or at least at 50% in these local elections, which are I would say most important?
Yeah. All politics are local, right?
Yeah.
You should care about who your local representation is.
Yeah.
I think the number one thing is apathy. My vote doesn't count.
Yeah.
Those same people always get elected. Those same people don't represent me, and I'm so sick of the politics, I don't even vote. I'm sick of politics, and my vote doesn't count are the number one and two thing I hear all the time.
Same in the Slavic community.
Yeah.
I would say the same exact thing.
And if you go back and you run the math and you say, wow, if 2% of people that share this ideology, and there were 18% of that community that didn't show up, if just 2 more percent, if we could have had 84% and 16 that didn't show up, Republicans are predominantly represented statewide down in Salem. And you have an even Senate at 15-15, and none of this stuff moves.
Right.
You don't get a House Bill 2002 if the Senate's at 15-15. You don't get a tax on the Second Amendment if the Senate's at 15-15. You don't get the school budget held hostage by Democrats. We would have passed that thing in March. We knew that the school budget should be at least 10.2. I think we argued for $10.5 billion that we wanted to see invested in public education. Democrats still haven't passed the bill because they want the threat to the community that the Republicans aren't doing this. And they're willing to shut down schools. Like, they'll take hostages and they'll take out the hostage before they accommodate your reasonable request. So it's an interesting place to conduct business. The challenge is on an individual basis. You ask who these people are, and I think you articulated this very well, is they're passionate about something that compelled them to be there. And they are thoughtful people. As individuals, they're very thoughtful people. I don't know anybody down there that's not there for a good reason. They've experienced something in life. They've seen somebody marginalized. They've seen somebody harmed. They've seen some investment that made a big impact, and they want to go down there and they want to duplicate that. Whatever it is, they're there for the right reason. But then they get into the machine, and the special interests come in, and the labor unions come in, and they tell them if they don't vote this way, that they'll find somebody else, and they'll primary them, and then they fall so in love with the job that they want to keep the job. And I think what was interesting to them in their perspective of what ballot measure 113 would do, it was informed by their own desire to keep the job. And I think they were shocked when 11 of us said, I don't care if I keep the job. if you're going to do this, I'd rather lose the job and stop you from doing this than to keep the job and have no say.
Yeah. Well, that is significant, and thank you for again standing up and fighting back. So we are, I guess, let's talk about where we're at now. How many days left until the end of the session?
We're done a week from Saturday.
Okay.
So we got 8 days left.
8 days left. My understanding when I heard this morning about the coming back, I thought I heard the bill 2002 was going to go to a committee first.
It did.
It did, and then came out and got voted in.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 2002, 2005 were referred back to committee. They were amended to language that was agreed upon, and then it came back to the floor this afternoon, and both passed.
Okay. Now, what's it's a 2005? Is that a gun one, or which one was
2005 was a gun bill that was amended to only include the fabrication of 3D weapons, these ghost guns.
Right.
I think, again, there is court cases that uphold your constitutional right to fabricate a weapon. So I fully expect that law to be challenged in court. I would like to have seen it amended to not include an unconstitutional provision that's already been decided in the court. It shouldn't have to be re-litigated in court to come to the same conclusion. And maybe it will be different, maybe the next court challenge will go differently, but it is one of those things. I'm not a constitutional scholar. I take my best understanding of what the Constitution says, both Oregon and the federal Constitution. And when something doesn't compute like that I say, well, that's unconstitutional because the courts have already decided that. First Amendment, Second Amendment, whatever it might be, or just foundational within the framework of the Constitution. We try and stand up for that and say that that's a non-starter. Like if it doesn't abide by the Constitution, that's kind of your first threshold you have to pass in order to consider a bill to move forward. And so it's interesting the way Salem works and the ability to decide, I'm not going to call traveling on LeBron James. It's the same in Salem. There are some laws that we say, I don't care what 134171 says about readability. I'm not going to abide by that law because we never have. Well, that doesn't make it right. The law exists. Either change the law, get rid of the law, or abide by it.
So I have a question kind of going back to the whole readability setup, because with the Slavic community, like I said, a lot of the Slavics came over here probably starting from 1989. That's when communism kind of fell apart. The first wave, actually it's the third wave, but when we came over, things were relatively good. So we just kind of prospered and did what we needed to do. A lot of people went into business and whatnot. But as we invite people over and we talk to them, there's so much stuff that's going on in the background. Let's say the Republicans are getting pummeled with specific, House bills that we never heard about because it never makes it, out into the public, like in this case. So with the readability issues, is that something that going forward, something everything's gonna have to go through now?
Yeah.
What's the outlook on that? And how much of an impact, let's say next year we come up on the same exact topic, it passes the readability test, what happens then?
Well, elections do have consequences, right? If you keep sending the same people back, they feel more and more empowered to move forward with their agenda. So at some point, you do have to have the electorate send somebody else. I mean, that's going to be what it takes to break the cycle. With respect to the readability and the commitment going forward, we have a commitment in writing that says bills that are introduced from here on out will meet this criteria. We also have a pro forma kind of written outline of how it's going to work this session, of how to get them into the journal without having to send every bill back to a committee and repass through the process. They've established a mechanism to read the summary into the record and to have it be in the Senate journal, to put it in a vote explanation as well, so that it's written and in the actual record, so that if it ever is challenged in court, that we've abided by the law to the best that we can right now. And so but yeah, the commitment is moving forward. They will abide by that law, or they'll change it. If they decide that transparency is not important to them, then they can change the law. They have the right to do that. Of course, they would take a political hit because I would point at them and say, see, they want to do these hidden deals behind the scenes. But that's the reality. Before I forget, you asked me about like who should do this job earlier on, and I want to answer that before we talk about anything else. Anybody. I am nobody special. You asked me if I had any experience, and I said, yeah, the budget committee. But even if I didn't have that experience, there's no prerequisite to run for office. Age, maybe. I think you have to be a certain age to run for office. I think you have to be 18 years old to run for a state rep. But run for office. You don't have to have a degree. You don't have to have special experience. Now, some of those things are beneficial in your campaign statement to say, I've been a school board member and I want to run for state rep. I've been a port commissioner, whatever it might be, that you may have served in some elected capacity. But there is no requirement. The precinct committee people meet, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. There's a built-in apparatus that is in the legislature that allows you local representation with your community, your neighborhood, where you represent, 700 to 1,000 people, and you show up to meetings and you have a say in your local party's politics. So anybody should do this work.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something that I'll always try to remind folks. Like if I see somebody who is at all, interested in politics, by the way, have you thought about running for some city board, some kind of a commission, some kind of advisory board? I mean, all those things would benefit. And, the way I see now, the people who are running, a lot of times they don't have common sense. Maybe they have all these huge, list of accomplishments, but they don't really have any common sense. So I'd rather have somebody who has common sense and maybe has a high school degree than somebody who's doing things like they're doing right now.
Our Senate Republican leader right now is a high school graduate.
Yeah.
Doesn't have an advanced degree, doesn't have a college degree, but one of the best negotiators, Tim Knope, one of the best negotiators I've ever seen.
Right.
Very practical person, very reasonable. He's, very centric. Politically speaking,
he comes from Bend.
He's a moderate,
Bend, Oregon.
Yeah, but very pragmatic person, very reasonable person, and someone that can find common ground with people. And a lot of it has to do with just his natural personality. That is a help to be more of a people person. You have to speak in public. You have to be able to articulate to people what you're thinking. So the ability to communicate is really important. But not everybody even has that. So it takes all kinds to work in the legislature, to do the work that we do. But there are a lot of retirees. The pay is not great. I think I get $36,000 a year, plus I get a per diem of $150 a day while we're in Salem. So this year, total compensation with some mileage reimbursement is probably around $60,000. So it's not nothing, but it's also, if you're putting kids through college or if you have other obligations, it's not, a tremendous amount of money, but it's fair pay for what we do. I'm only there for 6 months this year, and then I'm off for the rest of the year. After July 1, I go back for 3 days in September and 3 days in December. And yes, I still take constituent meetings, and yes, I still respond to emails, and yes, I still go on tours of, businesses or local farms or whoever invites me to consider something for the next policy year. But those are optional. And so you don't have to do that. We have moms that serve in office. We have dads that serve in office. We have grandparents. We have single people. Everything in between. Some people like me, I am a small business owner, so I own a business. I go home on the weekends and I do payroll and work my business still. But I just think people need to engage in this process before we lose it. Reagan said we're never more than one generation away from losing this. This is not passed down in the bloodstream. We have to teach our kids. We have to show them what democracy is and what a democratic republic, what it takes to run that. And so I think whatever we can do to inspire the next generation to step up, and it does seem like a younger generation is starting to say, I want a voice, I want to say. And I think that's fantastic.
Right. Thank you. We're coming close to the end, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I know you have to run, so I'm not going to keep too much of this time. I did have a few questions that came in that I wanted to just bring up. What's the update on, there was and I'm not too familiar with this other than just knowing what it is. The kicker, was that part of this whole thing as well?
Yeah.
What's the latest?
So we
on the
maintain the kicker.
Oh, awesome.
You're going to get all $5.5
Can
billion
you explain that
back.
a little bit more?
Yeah. So the kicker is it's a mechanism built into the state budget process where we forecast revenue. So we said there's going to be $120 billion that will come in, and that's what we build our budget to. If we go over 2% beyond that, then it goes back to the people. So if we collect 130 billion, the people get the money back. You don't just spend the extra $10 billion. You say, this was your money, we budgeted for this amount, and we live under the constraints of a balanced budget. Democrats absolutely saw that $5.5 billion, and they said, I'd love to spend that. I want to build the I-5 bridge. I want to build the Hood River Bridge. I want to invest in homelessness. I want to invest in the LIFT program, like all these different things that Democrats love. They want to put $1 billion into firefighting. And some of these things are worthy investments. But the reality is we live under the constraints of a balanced budget. We told the people how much of their money we were going to spend. And just because there's some extra doesn't mean we should spend it. We should give it back. We had a budget that we were okay with, and we were living within that framework. And so that's what the kicker does. It stops government from just growing to the extent that it can, and it really creates that one mechanism for accountability, a budget constraint.
Right. So that basically every Oregonian who pays taxes will be getting a check sometimes this year, or when is that approximately?
So
is there a timeline?
Now, in fairness, Dimitri, I don't know the answer to that. So the kicker has come back normally to people in the form of a tax credit.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
So in your next tax season. So if you give people the money in the form of a check, it costs the state a couple $100 million in, because the state doesn't always have the cash. So they've got to give you the cash back. They have to borrow the money to give to you. So if they give it as a tax credit, it actually saves taxpayers money.
Right.
So
that's right. I remember that now.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's coming in the form of a check or a tax credit.
That's right. I think that's the latest I heard. So next year, when they're doing taxes, that's where they can basically get a tax credit.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Perfect. Thank you. So that remains. Was that voted in part of the budget?
Part of the negotiation
Okay.
of the framework of what we have agreed to, and have had signatures from leadership saying, yes, we agree to this.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Remind us, what's your district exactly? Because a lot of folks might be wondering, where is your constituents?
Yeah. So I live in the Dalles. My district runs from Canby in Clackamas County, Beaver Creek, the backside of Oregon City, out to Sandy, Boring, up to Corbett in East Multnomah County, and then all of Hood River County and into the Dalles. So it's 140,000 people over 3,000 square miles.
Yeah,
with Mount Hood kind of pegged right in the middle of it.
Right, and I know when I was helping some folks fill out their ballots in the Slavic community, you were on the ballot, so there's definitely plenty of Slavic constituents that would be voting for you and did vote for you. So that's so I'm hoping some of them are listening today, and I like what they're hearing as well. So
yeah.
So the good news about your situation now. You like last position you had to start campaigning again.
Every 2 years.
Now you can relax a little bit and not have to worry about the campaigning again.
Well, I'm involved in leadership, so I'll be helping recruit candidates. I'll be helping fundraise. I'll be helping people go door to door. I'll still be helping with the campaigns. I just won't necessarily have my name on the ballot this time. So
so that gives you a little bit of
a breather. Yeah,
exactly. And that's what's interesting about the House races. Every 2 years, it seems like it's so fast. And
absolutely.
And Tracy Kramer, who just won, she's been doing great work. And that's the race we were talking about previously with Anna Kosachev.
Yep.
That was a very surprising win for me. I was very excited to see that.
Yeah.
And she's been doing great. So I hope she is successful next time around.
Yeah, I think so too. She's doing fantastic. She's picking up on how the building works and how the process works. You know, how a bill becomes a law is important. We didn't get into that, but if we ever come back, we can talk about that, because it does have to go through both chambers and then signed by the governor, and there's a whole process in between.
So we had Senator what's his name? He was on here a couple times. He went into depth on Linthicum. That's right. Yeah. He came on and he shared quite a few things and went into the Constitution. So we did some of that already, but we'll definitely have to do a reminder as well. And that'd be great. And I think we have a little bit of time to. I know there's some criticism. I wanted to give you some time to maybe address some. If you heard of any criticism, some of the things if you want to talk about. I think one thing that people are not hearing is that not all the senators came back. You were one of them that didn't come back, and others. So I think it's fair for people to understand that. And if you have a little bit of time, share what you have on your heart.
Yeah, and I think it's criticism from every front.
Right.
Like, we upset everybody.
Yeah.
We upset liberal progressive Democrats that said you should have never left to begin with. And then we built an expectation for conservative Republicans that we were going to kill everything in their minds. And then to have negotiated a return, disappointed people that they thought it fell short. I think it's fair criticism. I can tell you the only way you know what the view looks like from this side of the desk is to have the job. And so I'm comfortable with the decision I made to walk. I really am. I would make it again. I'm comfortable with my decision that I didn't go back today. I still think that 2005 and 2002 had some constitutional challenges that were real. Wasn't just in my mind. It wasn't just an excuse not to be there. Like, I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. And I also felt this moral obligation to protect children. And so I made the decision not to be there, to deny quorum, to allow for the space to negotiate a negotiated compromise. We arrived at last night at 11:30 at night was when the Cedric Hayden amendment language went through on parental consent, and that got a few of our members to say, that's enough, I can come back. We all represent our own communities. Like, you asked me where my district is. The other 12 people that were part of this, they would describe their communities completely different. Some more conservative, some very purple, some even slightly blue districts, slightly Democrat-leaning districts. Tim Knope is in Bend. It's a relatively liberal area, and he's got to be able to justify his stance to walk out. And if we had said no to this deal, he's got to justify that too. And as the guy negotiating it, I think he really did believe that this was the best the deal was going to get. And he wanted to pass budgets, and he wanted to have a lawful constitutional session. And I think he thought that we got there. And so, I don't begrudge my fellow members for making the decision that they made to come back. I think they made the right decisions for them. And I don't think they're mad at the 8 of us that said, it's not enough, we're not coming back. I think the question now is, what's next on the agenda, and can the 8 of us find a way back into the building? I want to see, again, what happened today in terms of how they met that legal standard for readability. I want to make sure that they are abiding by that. I don't believe there are any other constitutional challenges that I have with what's left on the agenda, but I'm going to be monitoring that, and I'm going to go back and participate as long as I think it's lawful and constitutional. And I'll vote no a lot. There's a lot of things on this agenda. There's a lot of this budget money that I don't agree with. I never expected to get my way 100%. That was not why I walked. I didn't walk so that I could be king of Oregon. I walked to make a protest that said, what you're doing is wrong and it needs to be done right. And so now that they perhaps are doing it right, I want to confirm that. But if they are, then I'll come back. I didn't want to vote on 2002. I still think that bill should have died. So today not being there, my protest was that bill's moving. I don't think that's the right thing for Oregon. I don't think that's the right thing for parents. I think if it were on a ballot, which is what I asked them to do, put this thing on a ballot, and I'll send it to the people, and you'll let the people decide. And they wouldn't do that. Why wouldn't you do that? You either know it's not popular, or you suspect that you're going to have to spend a lot of money to convince people that it's the right thing to do. And they didn't want to do that. So I still think I had the right stance on that bill. And yet, with what's left on the agenda, I think I can go back and articulate my reasons for voting no on a lot of things, and even supporting a few things. There are some things left. There's a small farm tax credit that I think would be awesome to pass. It would help the community of Hood River and the Dalles with some small farms, East Clackamas County, East Multnomah County, where some of these small farms exchange hands from generation to generation. This would be tremendous for them. So I do think there are some important things left to be done. The funding of the bridges, I think, is integral to the success of our economy. So there are reasons to go back. And to the criticism, I just would beg people's forgiveness if they really think I got it wrong, and encourage them then to step up and run. If you think that you've got a different perspective that's better, participate in the process, vote for somebody else, run against me yourself. I think all those things are viable options. And call me, text me, email me. Like if you want to have the conversation, I've had a few people just call me names. Hey, bad words you and bad words this. And if that's what your 2 cents, if that's how you want to spend your time, I'm probably not going to respond. If you send me a thoughtful email that says, I looked up the constitutional provision of this, or I looked up statute and what it says about that, and I want to understand this better, I'm going to respond. The name calling, not so much. But if you've got something thoughtful to say, email me, call me. I literally will talk to you and figure out what you have to say and whether or not you're right. And I'm not above saying I'm wrong. If you think I think that I bat 1,000%, I know I don't. I know I get stuff wrong. I do my best. I try and be as informed as I can and make the best decision. But nobody bats 1,000% down in Salem.
Well, I don't think it's fair for anybody to criticize you and the 8 that didn't come back. So I think it's fair to, if anybody does going to criticize, it has to go towards the 5 that did and looking at the whole situation in whole. So thank you for sharing that. Could you quickly just remind us? So HB 2002 passed, like the gun bill that passed last year, or we went through the ballot.
Ballot 114.
Was this? And I'm guessing this is going to be challenged as well. And do you think there's going to be a significant amount of challenges to actually stop it or to slow it down?
So I think House Bill 2005, the one that dealt with the ghost guns, I do think it will be challenged in the courts.
Okay.
I don't know if it'll be Oregon Firearm Federation or the NRA or a private citizen that will lead that charge, but I think somebody will.
2002?
2002, there's a challenge. Section 48 deals with some interstate considerations for liability and for medical providers that I think violates the Commerce Clause in the Constitution. So I would not be surprised if 2002, or at least aspects of it, get challenged.
You think Oregon Right to Life, do they have any interest in challenging it?
I will say this. I talked to Right to Life late last night, to see where they were at. I hadn't talked to them in a little while. And I think, I don't want to speak for them, but what I heard last night was that they were grateful for the space that we allowed for the negotiation to amend some of the things that we got into the bill. I think ultimately they would have preferred to see the bill die. But we were also told by our Democrat colleagues that Planned Parenthood no longer supported the bill because it had been watered down so much.
Interesting.
So, if Planned Parenthood's not happy with it and Right to Life's not happy with it and Democrats and Republicans aren't happy with it, maybe
in the middle.
maybe we shouldn't have passed it, or maybe it was fair compromise.
Right. Interesting. Thank you. And the last, I know we're out of time. Was there a part of negotiation at all to make sure like yourself and others don't lose their job, or not going to have to deal with that whole situation, or that's still under question?
I think there's a conversation still to be had.
Okay.
I know I'm going to talk to Senate President Wagner tonight and just try and get his perspective directly instead of through, other intermediaries. I'd like to hear from him why he's made the decisions he has, so that I can understand. And there is no due process right now. Again, I think people would like us to be able to not just have one person make a potentially arbitrary, capricious, politically charged decision, but I think they'd actually like to have some sort of accountability process built in, and there doesn't exist one today. So we'll see.
Yeah. I agree. There needs to be some due process. That would be great. Well, we are at time. I know we're about to get shut down. I like to remind our listeners that we did get into a lot of partisan conversation. I just want to remind our folks we're a nonpartisan organization. The issues that we did discuss, it is a very subject that the community is very passionate about, and these are the things that we talked about to clarify and educate the community on what's going on. So I just wanted to make that disclaimer. And
I'm just partisan. It's just me.
Thank you. So thank you for our listeners to tune in. Yaroslav, any last thoughts? If you want to take just 30 seconds, 1 minute, address the community. Any thoughts you have? Final thoughts, and we'll take it. We'll end.
I think I've said it. I hope the community shows up.
Yeah.
And again, I literally don't care if you vote for Republicans or Democrats or independents or run yourself or become a libertarian, whatever it is. But I do think that our way of life here in the United States is currently under attack, and that the political landscape has become toxic, and it's going to take some fresh blood to change it. And so, is that the Slavic community? Is it, the Hispanic community? Who is it? I don't know. But it's going to take fresh perspective to change kind of the toxicity. And again, it's going to take different media outlets talking about things in just a very matter-of-fact way. And I know I am a partisan politician, so to the extent that we were partisan today, apologize to the listeners. But the reality is, all perspectives are valid and deserve to be heard, and they deserve a voice. And so I think that's what we're after here in Oregon. Is we really are a purple state. We're a very center of the line state, and we are a little bit more blue lately than I think really is reflective of our communities. So we need people to show back up to vote and elect people that share their ideals. And
my understanding, the last election, we were very short. There's a very small amount of votes, or very small amount of votes that we were away, or you guys were away from getting the majority, right?
Yeah.
What was the number? I thought
1,500 votes.
1,500 votes. Oh, wow. And that could have got the majority in the Senate or the House.
It would have put the Senate at 1,515.
So 1,500 votes, 1,500. That is in one county that the Slavic community lives in. If they voted, we could have had a different outcome.
Yeah, the margins
today.
Always kill us. That's like...
I want to remind
Either
again,
on a smaller
1,500,
scale.
150, 150 голосов. This is what we were short of. You guys were short of getting. It frustrates me. The turnout needs to change. Thank you very much. Thank you, Slavic family, for allowing us to be on this time. Thank you, Senator, for allowing us for coming on and
Thank
sharing.
you so much.
I know you came far away from and in traffic and you were probably at the Capitol busy there, and so thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. The community, I would say 99% of the vote of the people would probably support the decision that you guys have done. So that's something I wanted to share as well, and I appreciate everything you guys are doing. So thank you for all our listeners. You were listening to Slavic Vote Live. We will see you guys next week. Thank you.
Внимание!
Редакция медиахолдинга Slavic Family не несет ответственность за содержание рекламных сообщений и авторских программ.
Новости региона. Выборы. Кандидаты. Стремления.